Hello guys, and welcome back to A Real Horror Show. And as you can tell from the video's title, today I've got a very special collection showcase video in store for you guys. As inside this box is not only the newest addition to my horror collection, but an artifact that I truly never thought I would ever have the opportunity to personally own. And I honestly believe that fate had something to do with making this happen. Now, as a lot of you guys know, I'm an absolute fanboy when it comes to the Evil Dead movies. From watching these films more times than I can count, to getting my hands on as much merchandise for Bruce Campbell's magnificent chin slapped onto it as possible, interviewing and meeting people directly involved with this franchise, and travelling to Texas Frightmare Weekend in the United States to meet Sam Raimi, Ted Raimi and Bruce in full Ash costume and get all my nerdy shit signed, it's safe to say that it's easily my favourite horror franchise of all time. And Ash Williams is also my favourite character in the entire genre. And something that's absolutely remarkable is that, in my opinion, between the original Raimi Trilogy, the TV series, the reboot, and Evil Dead Rise, there isn't a single bad installment in the entire franchise. And that's very rare for a horror film. And now we've just had an exciting announcement for a new movie, Evil Dead Burn, that will release in 2026. And please tell me your thoughts on this news in the comments below. I personally think that the 2013 reboot directed by 𝙆𝙊𝙄𝙉𝙎 is still one of the best modern horror films, and Lee Cronin did a fantastic job taking the series in a different direction with Evil Dead Rise. And despite the fact that both of these movies don't star Bruce Campbell in his iconic role as our favourite chainsaw-handed badass, they still managed to capture the feeling of Evil Dead, which is a perfectly gory blend of both horror and comedy. But Sam Raimi's original trilogy is really where it's at. These films have left an undeniable mark on the entire horror genre and have inspired other filmmakers for years since. To call these movies unique and creative would be a massive understatement. The original movie was as controversial as it was horrifying, being banned in multiple countries including here in England, where it was put on the video nasties list. But Sam Raimi proved with this movie that with a small budget, a tiny crew, a little help from your friends, and a few gallons of fake blood, you can go out into the woods with a camera and create not only something that will change your life, but also one of the most important independent horror movies in cinema history. And it made such an impact that Stephen King, who was a massive fan of The Evil Dead, calling it the most ferociously original horror film of the year, actually funded the second movie to be made, Evil Dead 2: Dead by Dawn, which happens to be my favourite movie of all time. It takes everything that made the first film great and cranks the insanity dial up to 100. This movie has everything: horror, comedy, action, romance, laughing disembodied deer heads, incredible special effects, and one of the grooviest performances put to screen. Either way you look at it, Evil Dead 2 is a blast. And Sam Raimi really shows off his directing skills with this movie, resulting in what I believe is the defining film of the franchise. And then we've got Army of Darkness. And if you think Evil Dead 2 was a bit of a departure from the original film, Army of Darkness just goes completely off the fucking rails. This epic big budget conclusion to the original Evil Dead trilogy begins where Evil Dead 2 left off, as Ash finds himself in King Arthur's medieval England, where he has to go on a quest to retrieve the Necronomicon that contains an incantation that can send Ash back to the future. Great Scott! However, with Ash being the flawed hero he is, he messes up some magic words ripped from The Day the Earth Stood Still and brings the Army of Darkness back from the dead. The final act of the movie features an action-packed battle sequence between Ash, King Arthur's knights, and the hordes of Skeleton Deadites in a finale that would make Ray Harryhausen proud. It's crazy how in the three movies we go from a straight-up balls-to-the-wall grueling horror movie to an action-packed fantasy comedy, where horror is more or less replaced with slapstick comedy. But the magical thing about the Evil Dead movies is that it works, and Army of Darkness kicks ass. I mean, just look at that testosterone-fueled poster, it's just epic. And although the title of the film is very iconic, part of me still wishes they went with The Medieval Dead. I also love how the character of Ash evolves from movie to movie. In the original, he's a terrified everyman who's just trying to survive, and then he's a chainsaw-wielding hero, and then finally he's a one-liner spewing wise ass. Each of these movies are so unique, but like I said earlier, they all somehow manage to feel like they belong together, creating this one-of-a-kind identity as a franchise. But I'm getting way ahead of myself here. This is supposed to be a collection showcase video, not an entire retrospective on the Evil Dead franchise. But man, I just love talking about these movies. And it only gets me more psyched to open up this package. Over the years, I've managed to add some incredible Evil Dead pieces to the collection, including these stunning cast-signed trilogy art prints by the master of horror artwork, Graham Humphreys, as well as a chainsaw hand replica signed by Bruce Campbell, a whole bunch of action figures, and this 1/3 scale Goliath of a statue produced by Prime 1 Studios. But the most special items in my Evil Dead collection have got to be the ones that are directly from real productions within the franchise. The first being these Evil Dead 2 cabin artifacts from the real Evil Dead 2 cabin that I still need to make a video about, so expect that sometime soon, because these cabin pieces have a really cool little story to tell. And the second being a piece that I don't think I've ever actually shown on the channel before, this 𝙤𝙬𝘼𝙀𝐾 costume that was screen worn by Ted Raimi himself in season 2 of Ash vs Evil Dead. And I was fortunate enough to purchase this in an auction after production ended on the TV show, and I even took this with me to Texas Frightmare weekend where I got a photo with Ted and the outfit. It still blows my mind to have this, and it can even be screen matched to the promotional photos for the show. I just need to find a way to display this in the collection. I absolutely love collecting replica props like the chainsaw hand, Freddy gloves, Chucky dolls, and all the rest of these amazing collectibles. But I've got to say that production made stuff or screen used pieces, especially props, really are a whole different level of collectible. And like most people, I wish I could own more of this kind of stuff in the collection, but I'm not the Monopoly man, and I especially don't have 28 million to spend on a pair of slippers. But with that said, I don't think I've done bad so far though. However, I've always wished to one day own something directly tied with the making of Army of Darkness. And I'm happy to say that today is that day, as inside this box is a piece of Evil Dead history that I'm very proud to say has found its forever home in my horror collection. This is also not only one of the best pickups of the year, but one of my greatest pickups of all time. So without further ado, let's get the bloody thing opened. Now, like I said at the start of today's video, I'm certain that some kind of act of fate played its part in this making its way over to me, almost like it's something that was destined to happen. And believe me when I tell you that this artifact has a lot of history behind it. So, first of all, included in this package is this photograph, which is actually a crew photo that was taken when production ended back in 1991. And I mean, that is just so cool. I mean, this photograph alone is pretty much Evil Dead history in itself. As you can see, pictured is all the extremely talented ladies and gentlemen who worked on the movie, and I imagine there'll be a few familiar faces to us horror fans scattered about in this picture. I love how at the bottom of the photo they've put Army of Darkness Crew AD 1991, that is brilliant. And the name of the photographer, Melissa Mosley, is here on the side. And I honestly have no idea how many copies of this photo are actually out there, but I can't imagine there'll be that many considering that this was a memento that was printed out for the crew at the end of production on Army of Darkness. And I've just realised I think I have a spare frame knocking around somewhere that looks like it might actually fit this. So I'm going to see if I can get this into a frame right away. So it turns out that the picture was indeed an 8x10 standard size, which works out perfectly. And it's a pretty simple frame, but for now it will do the job. And this photo is going to make such a perfect companion piece for the item I've got inside that box. And now the time has finally come. So let's take away this bubble wrap and see what we have. That is absolutely insane. I'm speechless. I genuinely cannot believe that I now own this. So I now present to you the newest addition to my horror collection, an actual Deadite skull prop from Army of Darkness. This is something I truly never believed I would have the opportunity of having in my possession. My mind is just absolutely blown, and I'm so ridiculously proud to now own this piece of Evil Dead history in my own hands. After all, when you think of the movie Army of Darkness, one of the first things that come to mind are the skeleton deadites from the epic final act and the battle sequence. So what better prop is there to represent the film? And as you can see, this guy has been through absolute hell. I mean, the jaw is detached from the main part of the skull itself, and what's cool is that you can see the metal gauge wire protruding from the skull that was used to attach and move the jaw into whatever desired position. And that wire there is actually still movable, but there's no way I'm going to be messing around with that. The other notable thing about this prop when it comes to production use is the notable fire damage, which would have been from some kind of pyrotechnic effect, most likely in the final battle between Ash and the Army of Darkness. And I mean, he's got a whole chunk of exposed foam at the back of the head here. And from what I can see, it's remarkable that this guy survived in practically one piece. But with that said, this prop is made from a very, very dense foam and is just super solid. Now you guys may be wondering, how on earth did this prop manage to find its way to my horror collection? And what exactly is the history of this prop? Well, it's actually a pretty interesting story. Like I said, some kind of act of fate was at play here, as it actually started out over on my Instagram page. It's not every day that I check my message requests over on that app, and it's something that I really should do more often. However, I'm glad I checked it one fateful day last month, as I received a message from a man by the name of John Porteous, who asked if I was interested in purchasing a prop from Army of Darkness. Obviously, I was more than interested, but this was so out of nowhere that I had so many questions regarding the history of this prop, and why he had contacted me in particular in regards of selling it. Well, it turns out that John's father, Pete Porteous, actually worked in the Hollywood film industry for over 4 decades, and he worked on a long list of productions, including, you guessed it, Army of Darkness. And although Pete was mainly a stuntman and stunt coordinator, on Army of Darkness he actually did pyrotechnics work, so fire, explosions and all that cool stuff. And he worked under Gary Bentley, who was one of Hollywood's top pyrotechnic guys. Now, according to John, his father said that after the final battle sequence and all the explosions and pyrotechnic effects and all the rest of it, there really wasn't much left in terms of remnants of props. So it's especially impressive and fortunate that this particular skull survived. Pete just found this skull on the floor after the end of production, and that's when he took it home, where it has remained safely for the best of 33 years as a memento from his time working on the production, along with, of course, his crew photograph. Speaking of which, Pete is right there on the front row of this photograph wearing the sunglasses, along with Gary Bentley next to him, which is really cool. Unfortunately, Pete Porteous sadly passed away earlier this year in May, which is why his son John was looking for a new home for this guy right here. And this is when he just happened to come across photos of my horror collection over on Instagram, and he knew right away that this would be a good home for this prop to go to, which I really appreciate. I've got to say, John, that you couldn't have chose a better place to rehome this guy, as this will truly be cherished in my horror collection along with the rest of my Evil Dead items. It really means a lot to me that John felt like my collection was the right place for this prop to go to. And I also don't think I have the words to say just how much I appreciate the fact that he also included his father's production photo with the skull. After all, both of these objects must hold some sentimental value and are ultimately a part of his father's legacy. Like I said before, I definitely feel like it was fate that John reached out to me in regards of this deadite skull. Sometimes crazy, unexpected things happen in life that are simply just meant to be. And what a life Pete must have led working as a Hollywood stuntman for over 4 decades. John told me that his father grew up hanging around Spawn Ranch, and 𝙤𝙬𝙎𝙍 was the first stuntman that taught Pete anything about stunts. And for you true crime enthusiasts out there, you'll recognize the name Spawn Ranch as the hangout of the infamous Charles Manson. And 𝙤𝙬𝙎𝙍 was very unfortunately a victim of the Manson family. And that's just one story of God knows how many there must be. And there are some videos on YouTube of Pete actually sharing some of these stories that I highly recommend you go and check out. But now I know what you guys must be thinking. Besides the prop's lineage to Pete Porteous, what other proof is there that this is a real deadite skull from Army of Darkness? And also, who made it? Naturally, I wanted to learn a lot more about this artifact myself. And well, I found the answers. Initially, I contacted Oscar award-winning special effects legend Howard Berger, who movie buffs will know as one of the 3 founders of the K&B Effects Group, along with Howard Kurtzman and Greg Nicotero. The first film that these 3 special effects gurus happened to work on was none other than Evil Dead 2, and the K&B company would later go on to provide the special effects for Army of Darkness, including all of the deadites seen in the film. I sent photos of this skull over to Howard, and I asked him for any more information he might happen to have about this particular prop. And he kindly responded to me, but unfortunately he didn't recognize the piece. At least it wasn't a Deadite skull that he worked on personally. He said that most of the Deadites he worked on featured this angry furrowed brow that was inspired by the work of Ray Harryhausen and those pissed off looking skeletons seen in the legendary stop motion sequence from Jason and the Argonauts. And this was only the start of my research into this prop, as I then went back and I watched Army of Darkness, which is a relatively common practice for me anyway. But I took a real close look at the battle sequence from the film's finale, and then I made a massive discovery. Nearly all of the Deadites that you see in the film's finale do indeed have that angry furrowed brow. However, there are a handful of shots that only last a couple of seconds where we can see stationary skeletons that do not have the angry brow shape. And take one guess at what happens to these skeletons. That's right, they're blown up in a pyrotechnic effect. It's all starting to add up and come together now, right? There is also this famous shot of a walking skeleton whose head is fully engulfed in flames that also looks to have a regular non-furrowed brow shape. But now I wanted some actual concrete proof that this is indeed a skull from a skeleton involved with that battle sequence. So that's when I decided to reach out to production designer Mark Hofeling, who has worked on a plethora of movie and TV productions as art director. But early on in his career, he worked under K&B Effects as a prop builder and a puppeteer on Army of Darkness. And Mark very graciously replied to my email with a lot of detailed information about his time working under K&B Effects on Army of Darkness. And I really appreciate him taking the time out of his day and what must be a very busy schedule to email me back and forth about this skull prop. He's also a very lovely guy, and he even showed interest in my Evil Dead collection, asking to see it, which is really nice. And I'm absolutely delighted to say Mark identified this skull right here as a prop that either he or his prop building partner 𝙆𝙀𝙀𝙀𝙀 made for the film, confirming that this is indeed a real Deadite skull prop from Army of Darkness. Once again, I cannot believe I'm even holding this in my hands right now.
That belongs in a museum!
But Mark also gave me a lot of information on the prop itself, such as what it's made out of and how it was created. The skull is made from an extremely dense AB foam that expanded into a mold that formed a hard outer crust. And like I mentioned before, this thing is solid as a rock, which may be another factor as how it survived being blown up and set on fire. What's cool is that Mark also said that the missing teeth matched the K&B skull mold. And when you watch the film, you'll notice a lot of the skeletons have these missing teeth. The armature wire coming out of the skull was also used to fix the jaw into whatever position they wanted for the shot, and it's still very flexible. But again, there ain't no way I'm going to be messing around with that. Initially, I thought this skull could be the one that was on the walking fire skeleton that we talked about earlier, but that was ruled out pretty quick as Mark actually kept that skull himself after he, in his own words, nearly melted from puppeteering that character himself. Although it would be absolutely remarkable to know which Deadite in particular this skull belongs to in the film, screen matching the prop isn't much of a possibility, taking into account the fire and pyro damage it's been through, although Mark is certain it's one of the skeletons that blew up at the start of the castle siege sequence, and it honestly does seem like the most likely answer. Either way, I'm thrilled to have this piece identified from the man who actually created it for the film. And my mind is well and truly blown, even more so than this guy's. And I'm very thankful to Mark for all of his help with my investigation. I really didn't expect to come into contact with the man who actually made this guy, so it turns out there really was no one better to reach out to than Mark. I also once again really appreciate John for rehoming this guy with me, along with his father's crew photograph. You've made a big Evil Dead fan and horror collector more happy than words can say. I mean, this is truly remarkable. I just have to work out how exactly I'm going to display this guy in the collection, as I want to make it something special. So if you guys have any suggestions, please let me know in the comments below. I lastly want to say thank you to my big brother Jamie for giving me some funds to purchase this guy as an early Christmas present. I really appreciate it, brother. And it's safe to say that Christmas has definitely come early for me this year. So that's pretty much the story of how I acquired a real horror movie prop from Army of Darkness, and the interesting history of an Evil Dead artifact. I'm gonna wrap this video up now with some cool shots of this guy, and also find a place to temporarily display him. So with all that said, please drop a like if you enjoyed today's video. Don't forget to slash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, as I have some great videos on the way to close out 2024, and I'm certain you guys won't want to miss them. Leave a comment below, let me know what you guys think of my latest pickup for the horror collection, and tell me if you're excited for the upcoming Evil Dead burn that will release in 2026. I hope you guys are having a great week, and until next time, stay groovy.